Izuku Shigaraki by Fangirl48 on AO3. Chapter 27 A Taste of Heaven. Grant, Torino, and All Might both instantly felt it. It was as though the air had been sucked from their lungs at the confession. Inko Akatani, the woman they thought was just All for One's wife, had actually been the first to use that name. How? How could something like that be possible? How did their All for One come to possess the name for himself? It was clear from what Izuku had told them that Hisashi had loved his wife very much. So how did he end up taking her name for himself? And more importantly, where did All for One and the First play into this? Tsukachi's hand twitched, wanting to get out his notebook to write down what Izuku was saying. His quirk was telling him that everything the boy was saying so far was true. Aizawa, on the other hand, just stood there, looking up at the statue, wondering what the woman's role was in the horror that surrounded the underworld's boogeyman. Izuku ran his finger over Inko's name, turning to look at everyone. Her name was Inko Akatani, and as I've said, she was Hisashi's wife. When I first met her, they were classmates at a university and hated each other. 200 years ago. Inko readjusted the heavy backpack again as she got off the bus. That curly-haired bastard had better appreciate her coming all the way to the other side of town just to drop off his assignments, she mentally grumbled. Clenched, slightly tighter around the straps. If Inko found out he was just ditching, she would personally make sure Shigaraki never saw the inside of a classroom again. Pulling out a piece of paper from her pocket, Inko walked into the direction of Shigaraki's house, eventually coming to stand in front of a massive gate. Glancing between the paper and the address on the plate, Inko sighed, realizing that she had found the place. Staring at the house through the metal, the raven-haired woman felt her blood boil slightly at the sight of the vast residence. Inko worked 2 jobs and had a scholarship to help her with tuition, and could still only afford to live in a crappy little apartment. Yet, here was the great Shigaraki house, the genius of the law program and future politician. Inko doubted the man even really appreciated what he had. Pressing the buzzer, she waited a few moments before a woman's voice answered. Hello, Shigaraki's residence. My name is Rin. How can I help you today? Hi, Inko said, trying to keep her tone as neutral as possible. It wasn't this woman's fault that she worked for the most frustrating man on the planet. My name is Inko Akatani. I'm here to see Shigaraki. The voice on the other side was silent for a moment before a response came. I'm sorry, but to which of the young masters are you referring to? Before she could stop herself, Inko blurted out. There's more than one crazy bastard? The muffled sound of clicking was heard on the other end before a loud buzz came and the gate opened. Taking that as a sign to come in, Inko proceeded to walk up the driveway, her eyes narrowing suspiciously at the sight of a few police cars. Putting the thought of law enforcement out of her head, Inko smoothed out her clothes and rang the doorbell. A second later, an older woman in glasses opened the door, giving Inko a strained smile as she welcomed her into the mansion. Hello, Miss Akatani. I'm Rin, the head maid of the house, she said, giving a small curtsy. I'm afraid that the young master Hisashi is in a meeting currently. Allow me to show you to the parlor, well, where you could wait. Inko put her hands up and shaking her head. No, it's all right, I can... Please, Rin spoke, placing one hand firmly on Inko's back, guiding her further into the house. I insist. Unable to say no, Inko let herself be led towards a room full of grand staircase. Dropping her back and looking around, Inko realized that the room was bigger than her apartment. Immediately, she got to work exploring, wondering what it was for. It had a reasonably simple, orientated table surrounded by comfortable-looking chairs, a small piano that she doubted her classmate could play in one corner, along with various other expensive-looking trinkets spattered around. But what really grabbed Inko's attention was a pair of large paintings that hung over the piano. One was of a beautiful woman with dark hair, though the painter highlighted green in it and cold brown eyes. Even though the woman was only a painting, she stared down at Inko like she was a bug beneath her shoes. The painting also looked at Inko with thinly veiled disgust, and was an older man with white hair, a small mustache, and goated and green eyes. No doubt about it, Inko thought. These were Shigaraki's mother and father. The man's face and woman's cold eyes looked so similar to her classmate it was almost creepy. Inko jumped at the sudden noise and carefully made her way to the door, curious about what was going on. Opening it just slightly, she peered out and saw Shigaraki standing there, looking more furious than she'd ever seen him. "If you think for 1 second I will let this go, as you say, you clearly haven't been paying attention," Hisashi growled, his hands clenching at his sides. "People have been killed. A child has been murdered." Inko covered her mouth to hold her gasp in. "Now, Mr. Shigaraki," a considerate-sounding voice answered. "From what I understand, the child in question had certain abilities. You wouldn't want it getting out that a member of your household staff was a freak, now do you? From what I hear, you have a bright future in politics to consider." A second voice gasped loudly. "Sir?" Inko felt her nails dig into her palms and was about to storm out when Shigaraki beat her to the punch. "A freak! A freak!" Hisashi roared, any patience he once had evaporating immediately. "The father has, pardon me, had been a member of my household for close to 2 decades. Now, just because some murderess claims her child has powers, they are to be written off like so much garbage? No, hold on, I didn't." "You didn't have to," Shigaraki bellowed. "Your answer is quite clear. Should a murderer say their victim had abilities, then you will write it off as justified, pat them in the head, and send them on their merry way without a second thought to those left mourning." "Mr. Shigaraki, Hogaku," Hisashi hissed, looking next to him at someone Inko couldn't quite make out. "Escort these men out. I have some calls to make." "Yes, sir." "Please, we're sorry," the squeaky voice began, sounding terrified. "We'll find her, I promise." Hisashi sneered, and for some reason, it sent chills of fear up Inko's spine. "Don't worry, you won't have to. I'll be calling the superintendent, personally, to ask for new detectives to be placed on the case, since his current ones have no interest in helping freaks." Whatever the 2 police officers were going to say went unheard as they were escorted away. Noticing Rin walk up to Shigaraki and whisper something to him, Inko quickly closed the door and moved back towards the table. Her hands were shaking as she started taking the homework assignment out. The gentle knock that came made Inko flinch as Shigaraki opened the door and walked inside. "Akatani?" the white-haired man greeted, his arms crossed as he scowled. "My apologies for the delay." Inko gave a nervous smile. "It's all right, How much did you hear?" Hisashi interrupted, his face mirroring that of the woman's portrait. Inko spoke, her heart beating a mile a minute. "All of it, really?" "I see." Hisashi nodded. "You would do your best to keep your mouth shut about it, then." Anger filled inside Inko as she stood up, slamming her hands on the table. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Green eyes narrowed as Hitoshi took a few steps forward until he was right up in front of his classmate, mirroring her stance from the other side of the table. "Keep your mouth shut." Inko growled slowly, all previous fear and nervousness gone and replaced with indignant fury. "How dare you order me around? Who do you think you are?" "I don't think, I know," Hisashi spoke, standing up straight and crossing his arms over his chest. "And I know that you think of me to be some spoiled brat." "Because you are," Inko spat back. "I bet never had to work a day in your life." "Just because I do not have to work, like you, to feed and clothe myself, does not mean I am lazy," Hisashi ordered, one hand slamming back onto the table. "If I was, then how would I know your secret?" Inko froze, fear all color draining from her face. I don't know what you're talking about." "Once is an accident, twice a coincidence, but 3 times is a pattern," Hisashi smirked. "And you, Akatana, are not as discreet as you believe you are when summoning school supplies." Before Inko could come up with an excuse, something slammed the door open. Whatever it was ran as fast as it could into the room, colliding with Hisashi's leg. "Hik-chan!" The small bundle cried, tiny hands appearing from underneath the blanket and grabbing onto the man's leg tightly. "Izuku!" Shigaraki gasped, his face morphing from cruel to concern as he kneeled down and picked up whoever was under the large blanket. "What's wrong? Are you okay? Where's Tomura?" Inko stood there, stunned. Here she was watching the man who just threatened her fuss over the small boy. Taking a closer look at the child's face, he and Shigaraki were obviously related. Was it possible her classmate had a child? He would have to have been very young when the child was born. "Stop that," Hisashi hissed, snapping Inko from her thoughts. "I can see your mind working. Izuku is my youngest brother, not my son. Though he does feel like that sometimes." A new voice came from the entrance. Looking towards the doorway, Inko saw a fragile-looking man with straight white hair holding a tray. The newcomer definitely shared the same green eyes as Shigaraki and the child, though his face resembled the woman's painting more than his infinitely kinder looking. He placed the tray on the table, where Inko saw an assortment of treats along with a tea set. The woman felt her stomach growl, treacherously looking at the goodies. She only looked back up when a loud cry startled her suddenly. "No!" The child screamed loudly. Inko winced at the volume and almost felt sorry for her classmates, seeing as one of his ears was right next to the boy. "No, no, no! Want Hit-chan, not Ro-chan." "Come on now, Izuku." Ro-chan smiled softly, holding out his arms. "Hisashi has to work to do. Why don't we go see about finishing our story?" Izuku shook his head, clinging to the eldest tighter. "No! Hit-chan, don't make me!" Hisashi sighed and placed his hand between Izuku's head, running his fingers through his curls. "I'll make you a deal. I'll go with you to see about getting snacks from Rin, and then you could go with Tomura, okay?" "No!" Hisashi looked at Inko, who had her hand covering her mouth to stop herself from laughing. "And I'll read you however many stories you want tonight." Izuku sniffed and pulled back, wiping his eyes. "Promise?" "Promise." Izuku wrapped his arms around Hisashi's neck again, going limp in the eldest brother's arm as they walked out. Inko waved goodbye to the boy, just to be friendly, only for him to curl more into Hisashi's body when they locked eyes. The eldest, Shigaraki, paused at the door and glared at Inko. "I'll be right back. Tomura, would you please keep our guest company?" "Of course." The other male smiled sincerely, looking at the freshly poured cup of tea. Tea? Sure, Inko said, taking the tea, letting the calming smell wash over her. Tomura sat down and poured his own cup, looking at Inko with tired eyes. Please forgive my brother's rudeness. It's been a hard week for all of us. Inko put the teacup down and frowned. If you don't mind me asking, what happened? Tomura said, his own clinking harshly on the saucer. I'm sure you saw the police on your way in. Kinda hard to miss them, Inko said, picking up a cookie and nibbling on it. They were here to not so subtly tell us that catching a murderer did not rank too highly on their priority list, Tomura explained, a dark look coming over his face, and Inko choked on a cookie slightly in shock. Serve and protect my ass. They're all just a bunch of bigoted fools, if you ask me. Excuse me? The student gasped, taking a few sips of her drink to try to clear her throat. They still haven't caught this person? They're assholes. Who are they? I'm gonna kick their asses. Unaware she was doing it, some of the smaller items in the room started floating as Inko's own power responding to her anger. Tomura sat there and watched, a curious look on his face as he grabbed a cookie off the now floating plate. Fascinating, he said, biting into the cookie. Your ability seems to be responding to your anger. I wonder, does that amount of weight you can lift change because of your emotional state? What? Inko said, snapping out of it, the floating items returning back to the table. Realizing she had been caught, Inko became nervous. Words were one thing. Experience had taught Inko that they could be covered in the sweetest of honey to hide the poisonous truth beneath. For all she knew, the man in front of her was just as bigoted as the detective was. Shigaraki's threat fresh in Inko's mind. Tomura gave the nervous woman a smile and waved his hands. Don't worry, Hisashi already told me about you. He did, Inko said, warily. And what does Hisashi say about me? Tomura smirked as he took a sip of tea. That you have powers like he and Izuku do, that your proposals for law are too short-sighted, that he's never met a more infuriating woman in the entire universe. Wait, Inko exclaimed, waving her hands. He said what? That you're frustrating? Inko shook her head. No, the other thing. That Hisashi also has abilities? No, well, yes, that too, Inko said, curious about the Shigaraki's abilities might be. The middle part. Ah, Tomura said, picking up another cookie. That your law propagations are short-sighted. Are you kidding me? Inko cried, reaching down and pulling one of her binders from the bag, opening it. Look at these. Ideas for new anti-discrimination laws. Arguments against restrictions of citizens. I even have some in here about businesses who publicly hire people, those with abilities receiving tax breaks. Those tax breaks support greedy men and women who will no doubt take advantage of their employees. They shall work them into the ground well and overpay them half of what they should be getting. Hisashi's voice came from the door, getting Inko and Tomura's attention. Hisashi stood there, holding Izuku in one arm, the boy staring longingly at the plate held in his other hand. I've told you this before in class. Your idealism could end up getting someone killed. Inko stood up, not one to back down from a challenge. And I suppose your slow and steady plan is the best idea? People are getting hurt out there. The law has to catch up quickly if we're ever going to help them. The law is not the problem, Hisashi retorted, passing Izuku off to Tomura, who sat there watching the pair with amusement. People are. They're stupid and attack anyone different from. Your laws place those different people in the spotlight with some naive notion that we can all get along. Tomura smiled and looked down at Izuku, picking up the plate. Why don't we finish that story now, Izuku didn't say anything, just hung as limply in Tomura's arms as he had in Hisashi's. Ever since Izuku had found Midoriya and her brother, he had regressed somewhat in his behavior. He was usually fiercely independent and acted as a miniature version of Hisashi. But ever since that day, Izuku had been terrified. He clung to his brothers tighter than he had when his father had died. Tomura had seen changes in Hisashi as well. His already overprotective nature was becoming suffocating. The middle brother had barely left the house all week. Even a simple walk in the back garden was out of the question. Hisashi's paranoia, coupled with the police's apathy towards the murderers, made the eldest brother fear the maid's return. Hisashi, who was usually so calm and collected, had one weakness, though: Inko Akatani. If Tomura had $1 for every day his brothers came home from classes growling about the woman, he would be as rich as the family was. That's why when he called Hisashi's professor earlier to request his brother's homework, he suddenly dropped the woman's name into the conversation. And it worked. Now, as Tomura made his way with Izuku to the garden for some much-needed fresh air, there was no need to worry about Hisashi. His brother was currently too busy arguing to come out every 5 minutes to try to get them back inside. What Tomura didn't know was that his little plan to distract his brother would lead to the shaky partnership between the two currently arguing. That partnership would grow into friendship and eventually something much more. Okay, so clearly I was wrong, I guess, and it wasn't that Inko had All for One quirk. It was that Inko had the name, which is still interesting. I still would like to see that. 2, Inko and Hisashi backstory, something I never asked for, but I now need. And this is very interesting. I like that we're going back in time and seeing little glimpses of what happened as we're also in the future and going through the motions, because it gives us perspective. I know a lot of people don't like the sudden jumps in time. Personally, I enjoy them because it is small little glimpses, and it can propel a story and make something more complex. Now, you have to keep in mind pacing. You can't be doing it every 5 seconds, otherwise it becomes, jarring, But like, for example, having a whole chapter, most of it being in the past, and then the next chapter being in the future, and then, so on and so forth, that's alright because it's not as jarring, And so far, I'm really liking this story, and I cannot wait to read more of it. It's very interesting. Also, Tomura accidentally setting up his oldest brother with Inko is the most hilarious thing to me. And okay, let's talk about Izuku kind of going back from being a fiercely independent little miniature version of Hisashi to literal kid. Or not like literal kid, but like literally he went back. He went, like, all the progress, all the independence went back, and now he has to be with one of his brothers. Otherwise he's a nervous wreck. It makes sense. It's a coping mechanism. He's still a kid, and walking in on that probably was the most scarring thing in his life, And also, I was wrong about the maid being the one that killed them all. So, I'm back to speculating, and who's back on the table for being the murderer? Kachan. Katsuki Bakugo is back on the table, baby. Back on the table for being a murderer. If I see one more damn angel number, I will go insane. But before I go insane, as always, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds, have a wonderful day or night, join our community Discord server, link is in the description, subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.